Hi, Monk, and this is podcast number 35. Um, Title this one is Loretta Young, Wild at the Waldorf. And then I'd have to add right under it, stick with this one. I'm going to be dropping lots of famous names. Now, the most impressive occasion for which I was Loretta's escort was a fundraiser for the Museum of Radio and Television in New York. This was April 1991. Loretta was going to introduce this segment of the program. She had to be coaxed, um, but after she agreed, I understood why she had to be coaxed because she never did anything halfway, and she worked very hard preparing for the event. Her remarks were written by a speechwriter her publicist had engaged. She then tore them apart and put them back together again in an effort to make those words sound like they were coming from her mouth. And next, she wrote it on cue cards until she had it memorized. Now, what to wear was taken very seriously. Finally, Loretta decided on a floor-length gown uh, by Jimmy Galanos that utilized a kind of a shiny fabric interspersed with swirls of gold, blue, and silver. She then had her friend Jean-Louis design a blue satin cape. This was just in case the venue might be cool. Packing was an extraordinary effort. Loretta had huge suitcases in which each outfit was wrapped in tissue so that they were, how'd she put it, given room to breathe. From the moment we left her home, this was to be a Loretta Young outing. Greg Fisher, a man several years younger than myself, had started working for Loretta when he was in high school, and in conjunction with more significant career endeavors, continued helping her into the 90s. Driving the Rolls, Greg chauffeured us to the Los Angeles International Airport. We flew on MGM, an upscale shuttle to New York that catered to the rich and famous. In fact, on that day, they had inaugurated menus by Wolfgang Puck, who was there in person to welcome us. The seating arrangements were very intimate. Our seat area was surrounded by our own entertainment center, and each swirling chair was given ample space. It was while flying from one coast to the other that Loretta told me, the only reason I'm doing this is for you. I know you like novel experiences, and believe me, you're about to experience one. I smiled and said, well, thank you. But in truth, it made me feel a little uncomfortable because it harkened back to what her sister Sally said a year earlier when Loretta was paying me so much special attention when Sally had said, don't you know, this is all for you. Now, we stayed at the Plaza Anthony, a luxurious hotel located on 64th Street between Park and Madison Avenues. Loretta had a grand suite on the top floor. I was relegated to a more modest quarters several floor below. We arrived in plenty of time to reach our hotel and prepare for the big occasion that same evening. Of course, I could dress in minutes and did. Loretta, on the other hand, was having a Queen of the Silver Screen fit. It seemed that she didn't like the arrangement of the mirrors in her bathroom. She called and they brought other mirrors, which had extension arms, but this effort too was unsatisfactory. For a reason I don't recall, I was in her suite when they brought the extension mirrors. And after they left, she said curtly, they just don't know how to deal with somebody like me. My first thought was, who would? But then I took note of the fact that Loretta had traded on her looks for 60 plus years. And by that time, she knew better than anyone what worked better were best for her. I realized how true that was a short time later when we were riding up the elevator at the Waldorf to the ballroom. I observed Kitty Carlisle, who had been an actress and a singer, but for my generation, we knew her as a panelist on the game show To Tell the Truth. And Tony Randall, who played second male lead to the Doris Day, Rock Hudson sex comedies, Pillow Talk, and Lover Come Back, they were both scrutinizing Loretta just inches from her face. Were they wondering if she'd had face work? Or were they amazed that she had maintained her legendary beauty? I'll never know. One thing for sure, Loretta had their attention. Before entering the ballroom, there was another large room where the press was lying in wait. Loretta clutched my arm tightly, and we moved from one media outlet to the next, the initial one being for print media. Photographers encircled us and snapped away. Eventually, I became very familiar with the chant, Loretta alone, meaning get that unknown person out of the picture, meaning me. I would have complied, but Loretta grabbed my arm all the tighter. Mary Tyler Moore was moving through the room at the same pace right behind us, and Loretta took a moment to introduce me. They knew each other from the day of Danny Thomas's funeral at the Good Shepherd Church in Beverly Hills. Thomas had been a producer for the Dick Van Dyke Show, and Mary went to show her respects, but was unfamiliar with the rites of a Catholic funeral. Loretta took her under her wings. Now, a few minutes later, we caught up with Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and the photographers went nuts getting pictures of Loretta and Fairbanks Jr. together. They had been known, they must have known that the two had made a number of films together. I was introduced to Fairbanks and told him I was aware that they had co-starred in 6 films. He replied, 6? Were any of them any good? I responded that I enjoyed The Life of Jimmy Dolan, and Fairbanks concurred. Yes, I think that one was good. The electronic media was on the other side of the room, and they were able to question Loretta without me being in her shadow. As we were finally leaving the room, I was relieved. The loud and aggressive behavior of the media had been really like an assault. Maybe I was still fragile from my breakdown a year and a half earlier, but I found it jarring. There was a kind moment, though, right before we left the room. Mary Tyler Moore came to my side and said, Ed, it was a pleasure to meet you. Wow, I thought. She didn't need to do that. Loretta and I were both at the same table for 8. She was seated between William Randolph Hearst Jr., or maybe it was just Randolph Hearst Jr., and Walter Cronkite. And I was seated between their wives. Randolph Hearst Jr. was the father of Patty Hearst, and Veronica Hearst was his Dutch-born third wife. Mrs. Hearst was quite lovely. I told her she reminded me of Audrey Hepburn. She said, do you think so? Then with her eye turning towards Loretta said, most often I hear that I remind people of Loretta Young. Mrs. Hearst, probably younger than I, was an engaging dinner partner. She mentioned that she had previously been married, and I don't remember to who, or if it had been more than once, but she had lived in both Monte Carlo and in South America. I asked her why that Randolph Hearst would bother to dress up and come out on a Thursday evening for such an occasion. She replied, Randy's the only one in his family who works. It's his work. I saw what she meant a few minutes later when Catherine Graham, publisher of the Washington Post, got up from the next table and headed in the direction of our table. Mrs. Hearst signaled to her husband, And as he got up just as the moment she was passing, creating an accidental moment in which they exchanged a few words. Another thing about Veronica Hearst that struck me as insightful. She said our friends aren't really very nice people. They have so much money that they don't have to play by the same rules and as everyone else, and they don't. I found her totally fascinating, but after a while she said, "You better pay some attention to Mrs. Cronkite. I think she's getting jealous." The Betsy Cronkite I encountered that evening was in a cranky mood. She told me about a book her daughter had written about depression. Mrs. Cronkite's attitude was, "Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, none of this babying stuff." I felt I had an inside track on understanding depression, and it was my judgment that Mrs. Cronkite didn't have a rudimentary clue. I also concluded that if her daughter hadn't been able to elucidate her, I sure wasn't going to wade into those waters. One thing that did cheer her up was when newscaster Dan Rather stopped by to say hello. Also at our table was Abba Eban. I knew that he had been the first ambassador to the United Nations from Israel, but I was more aware of him from the 1984 PBS series Heritage Civilization of the Jews. There was a moment when Mrs. Hearst had left the table, and after violinist Isaac Stern, who had been standing and visiting with Eden, departed, I spoke across the empty gap, making an effort to introduce myself. I don't recall if he said anything, but I vividly remember a gruff look telegraphing, "Don't bother me." Now, I'm going to stop here and continue discussing the trip to Loretta and I took to New York in the next podcast. Not only is there more to say about our evening at the Waldorf, but Loretta and I faced a moment of truth about my sexuality, sort of. So